Hi everyone, it's Lisa Hoover. I'm coming to you today because I wanted to discuss all the buzz that's been kind of going around with regard to the NARS settlement. It was a result of a lawsuit that was filed more than a year ago, and they actually had a settlement. And so I wanted to have a discussion with you about kind of what's going on, what to expect, what's the impact, because I think that's so important. So let's get started. So as you can see from the title, things are changing come August 2024, which is literally right around the corner. So one of the things I just wanted to talk to you about was the NARS settlement, right? The old adage, as much as things change, they remain the same, is absolutely true in this instance. So what do I mean by that? So this whole NARS lawsuit has to deal with the antitrust law of businesses to protect consumers and to make sure that competition is fair and to prevent monopolies. That's how it all kind of started. One of the things that people might remember from antitrust law, that's how we came information with regard to interest rate that homeowners have now, and those disclosures. All of that was a result of something happening, and as a result, it was an antitrust quote unquote violation. But that being said, that's kind of what was happening here, but not necessarily, absolutely not true, right? So let's kind of talk about what are some of the things that are going to occur come August, okay? So let's start with the first thing. The first thing that we have is, what is the NARS settlement? So NARS, as I told you earlier, is a trade organization for real estate agents and brokers. And so last year there was a settlement that they had been fighting with regard to a lawsuit that was filed by sellers who did not feel like there was a full going on. But the interesting thing about this is that fundamentally the truth remains, and that is simply this: compensation is negotiable always between the real estate agent and whoever their prospective party is, whether it is the listing agent or whether it is the buyer. Right? That's always been the case. It's always been the case. Were some people following that? Maybe, maybe not. I can't speak to that. I know that in the state of Maryland, which is one of the places that I'm licensed, we were following that. That's always been in place for us, particularly since 2016. So the difference is that the compensation is not going to be listed on the MLS. So the MLS is not going to communicate offers of compensation on their page. And the MLS, I know we use a lot of terminology. It means multiple listing services. That's like kind of where every agent kind of dumps. It's like a repository to put their property for their client on a huge scale so that everyone can have access to it. As a matter of fact, the MLS is kind of the basis for everything, because that's where Realtor.com, Zillow, all these other platforms pull their information from the MLS, okay? So that's why the MLS used to be a place where people, particularly agents, would be able to see what type of compensation or concession the seller would be willing to give to the buyer's agent. And so those were considered cooperating compensation or cooperating agreements. The issue was, and I've always kind of had a problem with it, is that the MLS was kind of like in between that, and that really shouldn't have been, because my agreement agents with my buyers is between myself and the buyer, as it always should be. The seller's agent is the agreement between the seller's agent and the seller. These are called exclusive agreements, whether it's an exclusive listing agreement or exclusive buyer agreement. So the thing that's going to change is when you look at the MLS, meaning agents, not consumers. When agents look at this MLS moving forward on August 17th, they're no longer going to see this whole process of, I can see what the seller is willing to provide towards the buyer's compensation. And some of people use that as their base, right? But at this point, it is something that really and always has been negotiated in my practice and most of the practices that I know. But like I said, it has kind of been around for a long, long time, where there's been kind of norms or the average, should I say. It's not even norms, it's the average price. And so that was one way to get consumers really like vested and offer compensation for people to bring buyers to look at their properties. All right. So that being said, if you have any questions, you know that you can hit me up. Not a problem. On August 17th, that's going to change. As a matter of fact, if you look at the MLS agents, right now, you've already started to see that change. Here's the funny thing about this. Remember I said as much as things change, they remain the same. In the state of Maryland, it has always been this way. It has always been a requirement that you have an exclusive buyer-agent agreement, okay? What's interesting about that is now there's going to be more consistency and uniformity across the nation, which is wonderful. So you can purchase a house in Georgia, and now you can come purchase a house in Maryland. And as far as being the buyer, you're going to have the same type of experience, or you should. You can be a buyer from Washington State, and guess what? Now you're going to have the same type of clarity and transparency that you would have in the state of Maryland. All right. So let's move to the next thing. So what's the impact? Because that's really who this is going to affect. So as you see, as far as in my humble opinion, the greatest impact will be on the buyer. Why? Because the buyer is the one that's bringing the money to the table. So if you're the person bringing the money to the table, it's going to have the biggest impact on you. Why? Because you already have the down payment. If you have a loan that requires a down payment, you will have closing costs. You will have out-of-pocket expenses. And generally, closing costs could have included your agent's compensation. Well, and so sometimes that was kind of taken care of. Right? But for first-time home buyer who's never had this experience, this is going to seem like a lot. It's going to be scary. It's going to be overwhelming. Do not be deterred. Do not be deterred at all. I'm serious. I'm going to make some suggestions if you decide you want to go it alone. Would I recommend that? Absolutely not. But if you want to be able to try and navigate this new landscape, of course you should. So one of the things that I've always said is that you should make sure that you look at the contract, because that contract is going to be different, right? In every jurisdiction, because the laws are different in every jurisdiction. Therefore, my concern with having a buyer, particularly a first-time home buyer, asking to say, can you give me the contract, is that they're not going to be savvy enough to understand the terminology that we as agents were trained, tested for, and been dealing with maybe for years. Okay. So that's my concern, that you fully understand what this contract requires, right? What it says and the four corners of it and what it means. Here's an upside to that. Number one, buyers get educated. Hello. I always believe education is a key. Why? Because I'm a firm believer in education. So I always want to make sure even my buyers, as well as my sellers, are clear about what the four corners of that contract have been set. So the upside to this is, or I can see a potential upside to that, is that you will be able to have some agents that will only do concierge services. What does that mean? Think about when you go to a hotel. You have concierge that'll direct you here and they'll direct you there. You have them for events. You have them for restaurants, all kind of things. That same type of concept is now going to be present for the real estate landscape, right? And so you will have some people that will do contract to close. That means they're not taking you out on any tours. They're not doing any of that pre-stuff. They're not getting you pre-approved, none of that. The only thing they're going to do, talking about real estate agent and brokers, they are going to be there for you when it's time for the contract. That means the offer has been accepted. So you've done the work. You've got the contract, or you want them to put the offer in, and they will take you from contract to close. That means your offer getting accepted to the time you get the keys. Yes. Also, there'll be some agents or realtors and brokers who will just preview the contract for you. So they could offer that a la carte type of service to you. Again, concierge is the way you need to think about it. And then you'll have some that will just be hybrid, right? That means they'll do a little bit of this, they may do a little bit of that. And so they start to parcel out how they're going to be compensated for their services, right? Also, you have the benefit of you can have lawyers get involved in this, but what most people know, lawyers are expensive, right? But you may be able to do something like a retainer. The benefit of the real estate industry is that most buyers don't have to have a lot of out-of-pocket expense except for the inspection, the appraisal, the EMD, which we'll talk about in a second, as well as for any home warranties that they want to have on the home. Those are like the 4 types of out-of-pocket expenses that a person can have, right? So with that being said, you may be able to negotiate, because remember, everything's negotiable. You may be able to negotiate with your agent / broker about how you would pay for the services, if you want them to take you on tours, if you want them to take you from contract to close, if you want any type of a la carte services from your real estate broker. However, you also are going to have people that want to try this on their own. Again, I would still tell you to try to partner with an agent, and they can do an a la carte service for you as well as for the real estate attorney, so attorneys have an opportunity as well to get involved. All right. So now let's talk about what all this means. Okay. So why real estate agents? You know that I'm a firm believer that you should have a real estate agent that you can rely on, even if you're doing a la carte services for them. If that's all that you're receiving, you don't want them to take you on tours. You don't want any of that. Well, with the new rules being implemented, which were always in the state of Maryland, right? I have to keep saying that because this is how my practice has been for years. So I don't understand what all the hysteria is all about. But in Maryland, you were required, or you took a person out to tour a property, that you must have gotten them to sign an exclusive buyer's agency agreement. What that means is that I work exclusively for the benefit of you, and you work exclusively with me. And we work together as a team, as we should, right? In order to make sure that you can find the home of your dreams. So I'm going to negotiate for you those types of things. So why a real estate agent? Well, one of the things that was quite interesting during the pandemic, and I kind of saw this coming in a little bit of a way, but not to this extent. During the pandemic, most people that were trying to sell their homes did not even want people in their homes unless they were pre-approved, not pre-qualified. There is a difference. And we'll look at one of my other videos and I tell you about what the difference is regarding that, right? But with that being said, so before we could even get to go tour the home, sellers were requiring that we had an agreement with them. New construction was requiring that we had an agreement. So this was a prelude to what's happening now. So why real estate agent? Because they're going to help you get pre-qualified, right? They should be able to give you a list of lenders or some options with regard to financing your home if you need to finance. They will take you on tours, and they understand properties probably a little bit better. Well, not probably, better than most people, particularly if they've been doing this for some time, right? They are trained in understanding the contract. I've heard some people say, well, they were just filling in the blanks. Well, you had to understand what you were filling in. And if you've been doing real estate for some time, then you would understand that reviewing contracts is serious. It is a legal document. You need to make sure you understand it. You need to make sure you can ask your agent questions. So in this new landscape, let's just go off on a tangent for a second. Let's say that you decide you want to do this alone. You've gotten your pre-approval, you've toured the property on your own, and you found the house that you want. Now, what do? Well, you want to put an offer in, right? So you're doing this on your own. So your one option is to first go talk to the listing agent. Understand that the listing agent has to work in the best interest of their seller. They can help you fill that contract out. They can help you put in an offer, but they can't suggest to you what that offer should be. They can't give you any comparables. Why? Because they're working in the best interest of the seller, right? With that being said, so now you can have them assist you, and you might be able to get some percentage like they used to offer for in some jurisdictions like a 1% or something like that toward your closing costs, right? But that may be one way to do it. But with that being said, let's take it and look at it another way. So they help you review the contract. They don't suggest how many days you need to have for inspections. They're not going to suggest that because they have to work in the best interest of the seller. They're not going to suggest about maybe even having an inspection. They're not going to suggest your days for financing contingency. They're not going to suggest your appraisal contingency. They're not going to do any of those things that would interfere or conflict with their ultimate responsibility and due diligence that they owe, an obligation they owe to the seller. So this is a time when you may be able to get an attorney to review the contract. Say, hey, seller, can I have a copy of the contract? Of course, they're going to give it to you. At that point, you may want to go talk to a real estate attorney or a regular attorney who's well versed in contracts, or you may want to speak to a real estate agent. At that point, only at that point, or then you may be in a contract to a concierge type of situation. Remember I talked about that earlier about being a la carte and concierge services being offered by realtors. That may very well may be the case that you end up with. But what about the next part, negotiating terms? Well, let's just kind of look at that for a second. Negotiating terms, no one's going to do that for you if you're doing this by yourself. However, if you have a real estate agent or a real estate attorney, they may be able to suggest the negotiated terms that you can negotiate with regard to this contract. And the most important part, in my opinion, is the due diligence period. Yes, the negotiation is important, but that due diligence is key because that's when your rights really are, taken seriously. Not that they aren't before that, but you have a lot of things that are riding on the clock. All right, so that's why real estate agent. I just gave you 5 reasons why. For the pre-qualification to tour properties, because they're going to know stuff about certain properties. They're going to have a little bit more history. They're going to be able to do a little bit more research, right? To review the contracts, that's going to be crucial. Number 3, to negotiate your terms, absolutely. And to make sure that you're in compliance with your due diligence, that also will be key, which is why real estate agent, why not? Okay. So this is what I call my D&D. And people are like, what is that? So I'm talking about disclosures and deadlines. That's the due diligence period that I was just referencing. And so let's talk about disclosures and deadlines. So let's first start with disclosures. Having worked on all types of contracts myself personally for more than many years, this is to me the heart of why particularly first-time home buyers and people that maybe haven't purchased their home in about 10 years or so need to make sure that they are talking to professionals, even if they want to go it alone, right? You need to make sure that you're talking to a professional because there are some certain things in the disclosures that you need to know, right? So one of the things I will tell you is the disclosure does not just go with the property. It also goes to the person. So what do I mean by that? So let's say, for example, there are certain things that they should disclose in the property, like maybe the roof had a leak 10 years ago. Right? You need to be able to make sure that you understand that. Maybe there was a bat problem that they had. That's a disclosure that they would need to tell you. What gets to go with the property that you want to purchase, they need to disclose that to you as well. So people say, okay, well, that's fine. Yeah, that is. But you also need to know there's also a disclosure of the parties. What do I mean by that? So oftentimes in this industry, there is something that needs to be disclosed about one of the agents. For example, the agent could be related to the seller, or the agent, if you're on the buyer side, maybe, because sometimes you have sellers that want to take and do this themselves for sale by owners. They need to be able to make sure that they can get those disclosures to understand if there is a relationship between the buyer and the buyer's agent, right? So, watch my videos because I talk a lot about, having those disclosures because to me, this D&D is like the most important. It's the heart of the transaction, all right? So disclosure of the seller is really important, as well as disclosure of the buyer's agent if you have one. All right. The other one relates to deadline. It's all about that calendar. That's why I have the calendar right here there, because I wanted you guys to understand just how important these dates are. They often run by days, not by working days. They run by calendar days, which means if it's on the 1st, it's on the 1st. If it says 5 days, that may, and the day started on Thursday, then that includes the weekend. And a lot of people think, oh, it's only talking business days. So what's the most important thing? The first thing that you have to do, and that is the EMD. I know I shouldn't be saying it because it's an acronym, but that's how I know it. It is the earnest money deposit. The earnest money deposit is your good faith deposit that you offer to the seller to show that you're serious about your offer and the purchase of this property, right? Most jurisdictions, if not all, have a specific deadline for when that's supposed to happen. So you need to make sure that you understand what the EMD is. The other big thing is the inspection. To me, this is so important because I always tell my buyers, you've never lived in this house before, so you should definitely have an inspection because you don't know how that house is living. And they're like, how does a house live, Lisa? I said, all houses live. They breathe, don't they? Yeah. And they're like, okay, she's a little weird. But anyway, truth be told, you should have an inspection. Again, that is a term that needs to be negotiated, but it's also a due diligence type of thing. It's a deadline type of thing. So you need to make sure that that's covered, right? So I would make sure that if you're going to do this on your own, that you have someone look at these things. But if you're going to get with a real estate agent or a realtor or broker, then that's kind of something that needs to be addressed to make sure that you understand that it's calendar days, not business days. All right. And the other one is, these are my big two. These are what I call contingencies that some people call them due diligence, right? And that is financing and appraisal. And what do I mean by that? So when you make an offer on a property, right? One of the things that you're going to do is you're going to start the financing process all over again. You're like, what? What did you just say? Yeah, you will. But that also has a due diligence period. It has to happen within a certain number of days. Right? If you are doing this alone, make sure you please talk to a real estate attorney or a regular attorney, a friend who can help you out. But definitely you want to or a realtor, if you decide to go with a real estate agent, and you want to have a real estate agent that's going to take care of this for you, so you don't have to be concerned about all of these things to make sure you stay in compliance. Because what happens, that could affect your EMD, your earnest money deposit, if you don't fall within the guidelines. The other one is the appraisal contingency. That is a contingency that is in there, right? And again, it has to happen in a certain number of days. Duh. So these are some of the things. It's so many things that agents on the buyer side do. And it's so scary for first-time home buyers. That's why I want to make sure that you understand what this lawsuit means and what it means as far as compensation. And I'm going to get to that in a second. But I wanted to just kind of go over this again, right? So let me just say this. Compensation has always and will always be negotiable, like everything else in a contract. Anybody that's ever dealt with any contract, when you go to buy a car, that's a contract, right? Your financing is part of that. That's a financing contingency. The terms, whether it's going to be 60 months or 45 months, I'm just kind of making that up, right? Then that's a term of your contract, right? So the reality of it is that compensation was always negotiable. You have always paid your buyer's agent. The only difference is that in some jurisdiction, people were looking at the concession, right? Or the offer of concession by the seller that was listed in the MLS as what they would take as far as their compensation. That's never how I valued my services. My services and my value is between myself and my buyer, something that we negotiate. I will say that over and over again. Does that mean the seller can't offer it? No, that's not what it means. What it means is you're no longer going to rely on the MLS to tell you what that is. You're going to actually negotiate what that's going to be. Can the buyer's agent still ask for those concessions? Absolutely. They can and they will. Will seller and their agents still offer concessions as far as contributing to possibly the buyer's agent compensation? Absolutely, yes. So let me just throw a number out there. So let's say the compensation is 8%, right? That you're the buyer and I'm the buyer's agent. And that's what we've negotiated. Maybe I started off at 10% and you were like, okay, I don't want this, but I want this. And so we agreed to a compensation of 8%, right? It used to be that if the MLS said 6%, then the buyer would believe that they would only have to pay 2%. That was the way it was always explained to my buyers, is that the compensation agreement that we have, which is the exclusive buyer agent agreement, if it said 8%, you're responsible for 8%. And that to me is part of the money that you need to bring to closing. My buyers have always understood that. It was always understood in Maryland that there had to be the exclusive buyer agent agreement. With that being said, so let's say Joe Schmo, that their compensation was only 6%, right? So that was a way to attract someone that wasn't their compensation wasn't like mine, but they just said, well, what the MLS says is that's what I will be compensated for in order to be your real estate agent. And so they relied on the MLS, when in actuality it always should have been the agreement between the buyer and the buyer's agent that was negotiated. Okay, I'm going to tell you why these probably won't be options. I love the fact that, maybe we could talk about them, but here's the funny thing. Why this may not work as far as the attorneys and the concierge services and the contract to close. I'm not saying that they aren't options. I'm saying why they may not work. One thing is that most attorneys don't like to get involved. If they're going to be involved, they want to be involved in the process from the beginning. You can have them review your contract, but as you all know, attorneys are expensive. That's one of the things that I said. So most attorneys want a retainer, or they're getting billed by the hour. And sometimes it can be low and sometimes it can be very high, particularly if they're a well-known attorney, right? And so that may be a cost benefit analysis that's just too high for first-time buyers. So that's why that may not be an option. The other thing is the concierge services. Right? So let's kind of talk about that a little bit. And one of the things I want to talk about is the one right underneath it, which is contract to close. So let's say why this may not work is because with the concierge services that you're talking about, you're basically piecemealing it. And for some buyers, by the time they add it all up, it may have cost them more to piecemeal it out when they try to do this by themselves than if they would have just negotiated with their agent to come up with a negotiated term that was agreeable to both parties, right? As well as for the listing agents, because they're not removed from this. When they have more people or less people to show their properties, that becomes a concern. Not because people don't want to show their properties, just because if people believe that they don't need these services, then they may try to do it on their own. And what does that do to the listing agent? At that point, the listing agent is put in a position where they're working in the best interest of their client. So they're not going to tell you all the things that you probably would need to know, or will probably hear from a buyer's agent, someone who doesn't have a conflict of interest at all, right? So that's one of the reasons these things may not work. The only one that I think that really comes close to being viable options for buyers and for listing agents, for sellers as well, is the contract to close. You have a lot of people having a flat fee, and this is what they're going to charge. Now, here's the thing. Then it becomes an issue of when should this happen? I definitely think the money should not be transferred until you go to closing. Absolutely. But with these attorneys, I don't think most attorneys are going to wait for your contract to close if they reviewed somebody. So I think that's where this whole attorney thing, retainer, may get to be a little bit costly. All right. So that's kind of why these options won't work. In my opinion, just my opinion. All right. So let's kind of recap. So the first thing that we want to talk about is agreements have always been required, particularly in my jurisdiction. You have to have an exclusive buyer agent agreement before you go to do any one thing. You understand what I'm saying? Like before you do a formal representation of them. What does that mean? Well, I talked about it in some other videos, but I'll repeat it again. That means with regard to taking you out to tour the property, having you talk to lenders and compiling a list of lenders for you to talk to, doing the home inspection and getting a list of home inspectors for you to talk to, a list of home warranties, all of that stuff. Anything that shows that they're representing on your behalf, then the formal process has begun. And every jurisdiction at this point is going to require that you have that exclusive buyer agent agreement signed. So that's going to happen. People used to be, I did it. I would take clients out, it didn't happen a lot, but sometimes clients were just in a crunch and I would take them out and I didn't have the exclusive buyer agent agreement signed. I did get it signed later on that day, but I didn't have it when I initially took them out. That is no longer going to be allowed. Why? There are going to be some people that are going to do it, of course. But here's what I will say to you. They will get fined if they get caught. The whole reason for this is to have transparency and to have clarity. And I think that is a great opportunity for buyers and sellers as well as real estate agents. You know why? Because then you get to show your value to your clients. Then the next thing is clarity. So no longer are we relying on the MLS. Hallelujah. Thank you, Jesus. That's what I say. Okay. I did not rely on the MLS when it came to my compensation that was received from my buyers. I did not rely on the compensation when it came to my listings. I just had a discussion with either party, depending on who I represented, and we had an agreement, and that's the agreement we stood by, right? I still will tell you there will be sellers who will, in conjunction with their agents, still offer concessions and will be able to have those discussions. They just won't be able to put it on the MLS. So they will still be out there offering because, as things change, they remain the same. Things will get tweaked. Clarity is so important and transparency is so important. And I think that this helps clarify for everyone across the board. So like I told you earlier, if you live in Washington State, or if you live in Georgia, or if you live in Arizona, if you live in Maryland, if you live in Pennsylvania, where I'm also licensed, then guess what? You're all going to have or should have the same type of experience as it relates to that agreement. Formal agreement has to be there before there's any formal representation. Got it? So I think that's wonderful. The other thing is compensation has always been negotiable, like every term of a contract. Remember I told you about the car dealership? Like, you're wanting a certain percentage and they're like, well, you have to put a little bit more money down. That's negotiation. So any terms of a contract are always negotiable, right? And so I think negotiate, right? So you still have the same thing that you always have, right? And also, this is an opportunity to kind of streamline the process and to make and ensure that it is transparent, right? If we're all doing the same thing, even though our laws may be a little bit different about how that's going to happen, then we add some additional layer of trust in this process, right? Because I honestly believe that you should trust who is representing you. You should trust their judgment. You should trust their ability to negotiate for you. You should trust that they want what is best for you. Because if you don't have that anyway, what's the sense of it, right? And if you want to try to do it alone, I'm never going to say people shouldn't. I think everybody should. If they want to try it, they should. But please make sure that you partner with someone that even if you want to do most of it on your own, that they can provide some services for you, to make sure that you do not fall out of due diligence, to make sure that you stay in compliance, to make sure that you are protected. When does all this happen? August 17th, 2024. That's when all of this is going to happen. So all I can say to you is just please, my people, make sure that you ask questions. Ask questions until you can't ask them anymore. Okay? And if they can't answer your questions, keep it moving. I don't know where that came from. I think it's a line in a movie. Not really sure. But just keep it moving. Why? Because you need to be able to understand what is going on, and they need to be able to explain it to you. I think clarity is just so important. I think it's transparency. I think education is so important. The more that we talk about things, communication, that's going to be key. And clarity and being educated on the subject matter. I think those three things are going to be extremely crucial during this time. Hey, and if you want to reach out to me, here's my information. You can contact me at my number, 443-383-4808. If you want to email me, there's my email. But keep in mind that August 17th is when things formally change. Keep in mind, my people, things have already started to change. They started back in June with regard to the MLS. So most agents have already seen there's no line item that says what the compensation that the seller's offering, right? That's a discussion. That's part of the negotiation at this point. So if you have any questions, what I would suggest is that you give me a holler, and please make sure you take care of yourself. If you don't know, ask somebody. Remember, it's a marathon. It's not a sprint. And be well.